Happy anniversary, Guyana. We became a republic some time ago. And this time people have matrimony and so on. How everything going? Aaron, wash out y'all. Anyway, enjoy the time. Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Pauline Baird, your cultural bearer from the village of Buxton, Guyana. If this is your first time here, come on in. In my village, we talk stories and we do it like this. And what this story say? Loud talk story. It's been a while since I've been here on this journey with you. You know, I had some tragedy in my family and so on. I went back to Guyana. If you didn't see those videos, check out the Wake Food. Yes, I live in Japan, and many of you have asked where I was, but here I am in my neck of the woods. It's a winter wonderland. Yes, not like good old Guyana with our sun and rain. I tell our family histories, our whispered stories, our traditions long lost and forgotten. This Black History Month, I'm featuring our stories. And we talked about Isa BV Man. Get the book, right? And while you're at it, click like, subscribe, follow, comment, whatever it is. I'm on YouTube, What Is Story Say? Facebook, What Is Story Say? Me, name Pauline. The show, name What Is Story Say? Click the button now. And share it like food. Well, what do I have for you today? I am bringing back an oldie but a goodie. There is this young man who grew up in my village. He was my schoolmate, so I can call him by first name, full mouth, Pat Eiffel. Well, he went away and he got his MD, but he's a village man and he could prop a talk story. Yes. And so I'm going to bring you one of his stories that he did on my show called Book It. Book It is a literary event that I host once a month featuring Guyanese authors and Guyanese artists. And so I feel, he featured on it. And his story is called Blacka. Now, I want to give you a little backstory of Blacka. Dr. Eiffel Pat, or Owen as we call him, he wrote the book and then he sent me a message saying he wanted to talk to me. So I asked him what's going on. He said, man, I write this book and I want you to get your opinion. So send it. So he sent the manuscript and I read it. I read Blacka. Oh, I was so enthralled. I was so happy to read this book. It was everything. And so we had a talk and he said he had ran this book by some friends or some people, I don't know who. And they tell him, man, the book now that the thing now that. And I said, what? Let me tell you something. Not everything for everybody. Hey, you can't put good thing for bad stomach. So I encouraged him to go ahead because I loved it. And the thing about it is, not every story is for everyone. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell your story. These are our stories. And if you write your story, you write them, me go talk them. You write them, me go help you. So I feel send a book and that's history. So now you get Blacka.
Blacka. The day I went looking for Blacka was hot, really hot. It was August, and it was one of those Augusts when the son took vacation and the father was holding court. And he vexed, real vexed. It was one of those Augusts when no rain fell, and it felt like hell, day and night. There were days that August when you could lose a pound or two in sweat, and yet the weatherman was saying, you ain't seen nothing yet. There was a heat in the street, and it seemed almost to have a beat of its own. It was a time when wearing a rubber dinky wasn't a good idea. Your shoe could turn to glue and molten fire. It was that dire. Blacka was my grandfather, and he lived at Buxton on the East Coast. At the time, when I went looking for him, I was maybe 14, and I had never met him. All I knew of him was that he was black, very black, unusually black. Black like my father and me, only blacker. He was my father's father. I had heard a lot about Blacka and about Buxton by extension, but I had never gone there, and I had never met him. My father had taken care to never take us there. He had left Buxton in his 60s, as I understand it, and he had never gone back. There were obviously some major issues between my father and grandfather, because my father never spoke about him and never had anything good to say about Buxton. On occasions, when I tried to question him about Blacker, I would get that look, and that's all it took to shut me up. That look meant assault and battery if you weren't careful. Back in those days, you could get the shit beaten out of you for asking the wrong question. Those days weren't fun, but that's just how it was. I always suspected that the reason for the rift was blackness. I guess that sounds inane, but let me explain. My father hated his blackness, you see, and hence hated himself and me. I guess he felt that Blacker was responsible for his blackness, and so he resented him. Blacker was the root of the tree that was the source of his misery. Anything black made him angry. It was a profound tragedy. My sister and brother had complexion of our mother, who was high yellow. That made for a fierce contrast, my father and mother, when they were together. He was a lawyer and a successful one, but his success hinged on intimidation. For he was tall, he was big, and he was black. And he had a baritone that rattled chairs and prosecutors in courtrooms. He was always angry because his blackness was always with him. It, in fact, was him. It consumed him. And in court, his articulated anger, his presence, and his voice came over as passion, power, and poise. His cases were high drama, panorama, melodrama. He had performances that would make Denzel and Morgan Freeman take notes, carry quotes. He was that good. And people loved him. But he could never find it in himself to love himself. They called him Black Mamba, my father, I mean. And to say that that infuriated him is an understatement. I guess it showed how deep the black resentment thing went. I remember watching my father chasing after Rasta for calling him Black Mamba. And that isn't even the joke. For he was on his way to work, all fly with suit and tie. And I won't lie, I laughed until I had to cry. For he fell in the street. I think he even lost a couple of teeth chasing that guy. And I kept asking myself, why? But he was okay, I guess, except for a missing tooth and a dirty suit. But I must say that incident made my day. I was the youngest, and I was largely ignored in my family. My blackness coupled with my acting out caused it or was a result of it. I'm not sure which was which. What I know is that I was into all manner of mischief. You name it, I was in it and got away with it. I was like the blow picnic, the family secret that everybody knew except me, and I loved it. I got into gambling pretty early, for I was good at math and numbers. It was easy to take people's money. I stayed out late, skipped school, and didn't go to church on Sunday with the family. My siblings hated me, for they had to be who my parents wanted them to be, prim and prissy. Part of it, though, was straight jealousy. They wished that they could be, like me, black and free, but minus the black legacy, obviously. For as far back as I can remember, I was intrigued by Blacker and by Buxton. There were some strange and major contradictions there. I had heard, for example, that Buxton was a place populated by thieves, murderers, and nars, a place of feuds and wars, a place devoid of light, the kind of place you had to avoid at night, sort of like a cemetery, a place you didn't go, a straight-up no-no. I heard that parties ended up in shootings and stabbings over inconsequential things, like strangers daring to dance with women from the village. I mean, that's it. Real intimidating stuff. And to add to that, you had men with false names like World War, War Tanga, War Dog, Jack Palance, Hulk, Killer, Killala, Monster, Death, and Satan. Yes, you heard that right. Satan lived in Buxton. But then I also heard of another Buxton, a place of community and caring, a place of resistance and daring, a place that valued education, culture, and its history. a strange contradiction, a perennial mystery. And my young mind could not bridge these contradictions. I could not reconcile them. They did not meet. They could not meet. The tendency of most is to reject one and accept the other, for it makes things simple. It gives peace of mind. You no longer have to go through the mental gymnastics of trying to make sense of that which seems to make none, to finish what obviously isn't done. But for some reason, I couldn't do that. I refused to throw one out and embrace the other, to throw out the baby and keep the bathwater. I held both concepts in my head and watched them battle each other. And I guess it was that pulling and tugging, that strange war that created the intrigue of Buxton and Blacker in me. I wanted to know at some deep level whether one, the other, both, or neither of the story was true and why. I had no idea why this was so important to me, but it was. It just was what it was. I'm not sure how I got to Buxton. I was just there. To begin with, I didn't decide that day that I was going there. I was passing the East Coast car park when something just literally possessed me. It was as though I was abducted by some unseen force and guided into and seated in a minibus. That was it. To this day, I couldn't tell you what happened from the time I entered the minibus to when I arrived in Buxton. I didn't feel the sea breeze that assaults your senses. I didn't hear any of the loud dancehall music that I know was blaring in the vehicle. I didn't see anybody or anything from the time I left Georgetown until I arrived. And I was terrified. I wasn't sure what to do or where to go. I just didn't know. I was just standing there on the thoroughfare, wondering if I should just get back in the next bus home. Problem was, I didn't have a return fare. Eventually, I started walking. I knew that Blacker lived somewhere down at the back of the village. That was as much as I knew. Beyond that, I hadn't a clue. When I arrived at the railway line, I wasn't sure how to proceed. My head was on a spin cycle when I saw them, a group of men sitting on a log gaffin. They had no horns, guns, or knives, at least that I could see. They looked like regular people to me, so I walked nervously over and asked about Blacker. They told me to keep walking until I got to the last house. I couldn't miss it, they said. It was kind of Kanwa. It looked like the flag of Guyana. Blacker lived, they said, about half a mile further on into the back dam. And it was hot, really hot. Nothing moved except for an occasional rice-eater dog that barked from the safety of its yard. The coconut trees stood stock still, and there was this shimmering haze in the distance. And there was no breeze. I walked until I got to the bottom of the village, and then I paused. And then this feeling of foreboding started to take hold of me. By now, I was sweating down to my shorts, and I was beginning to conclude that this might not be a good idea after all. It seemed I had hit the proverbial wall. But for some reason, I kept walking. And with each step, I was becoming more and more apprehensive. And then I heard it. It was a drumming, a strange kind of drumming. It was a kind of drumming the likes of which I had never heard. I knew I had never heard anything like it, and yet it was eerily familiar. It was as foreign as Mars, yet as familiar as my face. And it was disorienting. And within this state of disorientation, I froze. I couldn't move. I was suspended in its subtle groove. There was a fast and slow to it, an ebb and flow to it, a come and go to it, a yes and no to it, a to and fro to it, a high and low to it, and it was sort of suffocating. It was in and around me like a fish in the sea. I could feel it in my toes, in my nose, in my hair, in my clothes. It throbbed and bobbed with this questioning rhythm. And within this movement, a tension was created. And this tension created a space, a vacuous space. And that space was occupied by a silence, a throbbing silence, a silence that was pregnant with something, an eerily familiar something. It was a waiting silence, a frightening silence, and I knew that silence. I recognized that silence. I stood rooted to that spot for what seemed like an eternity, but couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. And then it stopped. The drumming, I mean. I kept walking, by now not seeing any houses or people. I was about to turn back when I saw this rickety bridge over the trench. I was standing there contemplating it when I saw him. I immediately knew that it was him. He was the blackest human I had ever seen, at that point or since. It made you wince. He was blacker than blacks, black fowl, black he, black and shine, nugget, bun up, tarma and combined. And this is from somebody who was pretty black himself. He was black, a bold black, a black that seemed blacker than black, or at least was as black could ever be. He was a black that was loud, that was proud, that was otherworldly endowed. It was a black that shouted across the space that separated us and laughed at the light that burnished him. A black with a strange hue, a weird sheen, a black like I had never seen. A black that seemed obscene and would have been but for its luster and sheen. It was an omega black, a black that was an exclamation, a black without explanation, a shocking black, a statement of fact, a black attack. It locked your eyes in a sort of perceptual vice and left you speechless. I was in awe. It was all I saw. Then he spoke and the spell broke. He spoke, but I never heard what it was that he said. He was huge, 6 foot plus and big to match. He reminded me of Kano or Big Black Boykin from Fantasy Factory, but without the belly. He had to be in his 70s, but he looked 50, agile and shifty. He had a huge, disheveled bongonati that fell every which way and that had hints of grey. It was then that I saw that it was him who had been drumming. His drum was beside him, rustic as can be, under the mango tree where he had been sitting. And he stood there for a long while looking me over from head to toe. That is when I noticed his eyes. They were huge. They in fact couldn't be as huge as they seemed. And they were soft, the softest eyes I had ever seen. Then he smiled, a smile that transformed his face, a smile that made him into a child. And it took all of the anxiety out of me. And without knowing why, I felt my face smile back. Then he laughed, a crazy guttural laugh, a laugh that shook the mango tree he was standing under, and that made me wonder how my father could hate this man who was his father. And without knowing why, I started to laugh as well. We just stood there laughing like two crazy people. Then he came over the bridge and he grabbed me and he hugged me. And he touched my nose and the arch of my brow. And then he held me at arm's length and he looked deep into me. I mean that literally. He looked into me. His eyes, his gaze seemed to grab my eyes and fix them. And he moved his head from side to side, all the while peering intently into my eyes, as if searching for something. I guess that sounds intrusive or maybe threatening, but it really wasn't. As a matter of fact, it had a soothing sort of effect. I felt mildly drowsy, and that was all. Then he stepped back. You have come, he said, and I knew there and then that I was home. I never went back to my father's house, and he never came to look for me. And I knew that he knew where I was.
Wow, what a reading. Hmm.
Thank you.
When I read it, I hear this conflict about blackness and people accepting their skin. So here we are talking about blackness. Blackness a village. Me village, you village, Alawi village. What stories do you know about discrimination or separation in terms of color within our homes, our families, our schools, at home and abroad? Let me talk story. What do people do with blackness? Let talk story. In me village, Me don't know about you village, but in me village, you see this term black? It means something. We just talk about black in some interesting ways. Let me tell you. Blacker, blackie, blackboard, Maggie blackboard, black and shine pan the railway line. Y'all do Blacker Village now? Blacker Village, and you write the thing then why you know. All them fast name with black. You see, we just treat black in a different kind of way. You see, Guyanese and Caribbean people can make anything entertaining. Sometimes these things got deep, deep import. Sometimes it does insult people. Let me talk about this. When you hear them fast name with black, how you just feel? What is the fast names you hear with black? Anyway, I feel, Pat I feel, or Owen I feel as we call him, he break down the story in blacker. In the next episodes, we're going to address blackness in the African Guyanese community, the village community, when we talk to Brother Kwesi Ojinga again about black. So y'all watch out, y'all contribute and talk this thing. This is we story and we talking the thing. And why we talking the thing? So that we can understand ourselves better and our children can understand our histories a little better or differently. Right? Click a button, share them like food. Enjoy. And what am I wearing? You know it. Dara Dara. Dara is my sister. She has her business in Antigua. Dara Dara Handmade. So I feature her. Big up Dara Dara. She got you covered. Iowa good. Huh. You see? You make it, that's very good. Awesome. I know you got mad skills.